Good morning. It is Tuesday, July the 9th, and this is The Drill. Thank you very much, and this is Ron, your host, the one of only four true conservatives in the United States of America today, because we're the only ones that make the presumption for the status quo. This podcast called The Drill is about the difference between being a true conservative and being an issues-based conservative. It's about what true conservatism is and why it matters. My podcast is made possible by Spreaker.com. It can be heard on iTunes, Spotify, and Google. My email address is storytimes@hotmail.com. I'm on Twitter at Ronald Hardgrove and on Facebook at The Drill. So I started my socio-political odyssey as a conservative Republican. I was taught by the left that I was a conservative because of where I stood on the issues, which sounded reasonable. But whenever I engaged a liberal in debate, I couldn't win. I soon figured out that the issues were a fallacy and that only appeared reasonable, but were in reality a trap. The issues were created by the left for the left. The issues are an attempt to subordinate reality to politics. So, is there any way for a conservative to win? Yes, by redefining what it means to be a conservative. Instead of defining conservatism by the issues, I define the word conservative by reality, and the reality is that the presumption is always made for the status quo. I change only when there's an obvious case for change. And the left has the burden of proof, always. By redefining the word conservative, I will not only win, I will never lose. And the purpose of my broadcast is to convince issues conservatives to become real conservatives and thereby learn to defeat the left each and every day. So there's two parts to two parts. If you listen to a radio broadcast like, let's say, Rush Limbaugh, he's going to be talking about one or two broad subjects. He's either going to be talking about voting, or he is going to be talking about issues that have to do with voting, or he is going to be talking about issues that have to do with debate. So, and when it comes to voting, because when you're dealing with voting, there's no the issue of making the presumption for the status quo is usually applies in debate, but it raises the question: well, what do you do once you get in the voting booth? How do you vote the status quo in the voting booth? Basically, there's two guidelines for the true conservative once they get into the voting booth, and that is government neutrality and individuality. Government neutrality and individuality are the essences of our Constitution. The true conservative should always vote for a candidate or issue, if you happen to live in a state that has the initiative process, that promotes government neutrality. This means that the government, any government, is not allowed to prevent anything. A lot of governments and a lot of politicians come out and make the claim, we've got to prevent gun violence, or we have to prevent DUIs, or we have to prevent pollution. The problem with that is that any effort on the part of the government to prevent anything necessarily involves violating the God-given, constitutionally guaranteed rights of its citizens or residents. Okay? Violating the U.S. Constitution. The only way for the government to prevent gun violence is to ban guns. The only way for the government to prevent pollution is to ban commercial activity. The only way for the government to prevent racism is through indoctrination. For instance, busing. The second issue that you're looking for when you're going into the voting booth is the issue of individuality. True conservatives should always vote for the candidate or issue that stands for the rights of the individual and not the rights, so-called rights, of groups. There is no such thing as group rights. They don't exist. The only thing that exists is the rights of the individual. Okay, and also the reason you don't want to be voting for group rights is that support for one group necessitates opposition to another. So, for instance, you cannot be pro-women's rights without being anti-men's rights. I wrote an article a few years ago about Jay Leno, who was making some kind of crack about rape, and that, in Arab countries, a woman has to have 2 male witnesses to be able to take a man into court for rape. And he cracked that in the United States, the woman has to have 27 witnesses or something, and it had to do with Bill Cosby, the Bill Cosby situation. And I wrote a response saying, called Jay Leno's misandry, because basically what he was trying to do is stand up for women's rights. The problem is that in so doing, he was tarring and feathering all men and being basically anti-man. And so anytime you're involved in promoting the rights of a group, you're dismissing the rights of somebody else. You can't be gay for gay rights without taking away rights from straights. You cannot, or being anti-straight rights. You cannot be pro-black rights without being anti-white rights, or for that matter, perhaps anti-Hispanic and anti-Asian as well. So you promote one particular group, then you're necessarily opposed to another group or groups. It's anti-democratic, and it's left and a bad idea. It's wrong. Let's put it that way. So the empowerment of women was supposed to come at the expense of the power of men, sexually, the pill and abortion, economically, working outside the home, and legally with no-fault divorces. Unfortunately for the women's movement, a lot of those issues ended up doing more to empower men than they did to empower women. The pill and abortion made it easier for 18 to 25-year-old men to run around and sling their seed. Working outside the home took a lot of pressure off of men to be the breadwinners, and no-fault divorces meant that men could feel free, irresponsible men could feel free to abandon their wives and their families whenever they felt like it. So, the other issue, again, broad issue that you're going to hear on the radio is issues of debate. Now, very often what you're going to have is hear the pundit, the radio host, debating a news article, which is rather ridiculous. You don't want to be debating news articles. You debate people face to face. Have them on, or sometimes they're not debating a news article like a written news article, but they'll debate. Rush Limbaugh does it all the time. He'll debate a clip. He'll play a clip of Nancy Pelosi saying something, and then he'll try to debate it and defeat it. And it can't be done. You just end up looking ridiculous. No true conservative ever tries to debate the news, but instead debates individuals. And the true conservative must begin all debates by making the presumption for the status quo. No true conservative ever tries to prove a negative. Means you have to be going to things open-minded. Somebody says, let's have universal health care. You know what, at first blush, that sounds pretty damn good. It should sound pretty damn good to everybody. But there's questions. I've got questions. How is it you propose to pay for this? Are you going to tax people? And if so, who are you going to tax? First, another question is universal health care for who? Is that going to be for everybody that is a citizen in the United States? Or is it going to be everybody that just happens to be living within the borders? And if that's the case, what about people that come here illegally? Maybe there's people that come here on vacation with a visa or green card, but they're here just to avail themselves of free health care. Are we going to provide free health care to those individuals? Okay, make the left do its job. Make them prove their point. We don't have to prove why something won't work. They have to prove why it will. And also with regards to debate, a true conservative always ignores arbitrary claims and questions. So you can acknowledge it or identify it. But Rush Limbaugh, for example, is one who consistently tries to argue about or come to the rescue of people that in which arbitrary claims have been made about them. Usually President Trump. So somebody comes out and makes the arbitrary claim that President Trump is a racist. They have no proof. They offer no evidence. They just make the claim. And Rush Limbaugh is very busy then trying to rehabilitate the president's image. But the only thing he's doing is exactly the opposite. He's helping to dirty the image of the President of the United States by helping him defend nothing. Okay, because if nobody produces evidence or proof, they basically said nothing. What Rush Limbaugh should do is simply acknowledge that the claim is arbitrary, they produce no evidence or proof, and so therefore I get to ignore it and move on to something else. Okay, that's what every true conservative should be doing. You can either ignore it outright or at least tell the other person it's an arbitrary claim, I get to ignore it, have a nice day, and walk away. So other than issues of politics, we also have issues of culture. Politics are something that you're going to be dealing with on a once-in-a-while basis. You may or may not run into somebody today that is going to want to engage you into some type of a political discussion. But you will always, every day, throughout the day, you're going to be dealing with cultural issues. Let's see. First thing is judgment. How many times have you gone through your life and you've made a judgment and somebody says, "Don't judge"? I've had it happen to me at work where a coworker told me, "Don't judge." He yelled at me, "Don't judge." Sorry, judgment is an inherent and inescapable part of life. And it is the biggest mistake that right-wing talk show hosts make, including Rush Limbaugh, is failing to judge. And in failing to judge, they consistently miss opportunities to promote conservatism. So that's what they should be if they want to be a conservative, if they want to advertise themselves truthfully as a conservative talk show host. So the most striking example of that is when you hear Sean Hannity or Rush Limbaugh saying, "What if the Republicans did that? What if conservatives did that?" When they're talking about somebody on the left, let's say Joe Biden. Joe Biden comes out and says that Barack Obama was a clean and articulate black man. Okay, and I've heard Rush Limbaugh many times say, "What if a Republican had said that? What if a conservative had said that?" Well, then the news departments would go bananas, and then the conservative would be ostracized, and the conservative would then be out of a job and not have to move out of his neighborhood, and all these catastrophic things are going to happen. Problem with that kind of an approach is, number one, you're giving way too much power to the left. They don't have any power to get you fired from your job. They don't have any power. They have no authority, no power, and they can't win. The only reason they appear to win is because of the right. The right hands them victories, left hand over fist. Okay, so, and that what they should be saying is using this as an opportunity, again, to promote conservatism. The second problem I wanted to get to before I get to this is with Rush Limbaugh's approach of saying, what if the right does this, what if the right did that, is it makes him sound as though he's jealous. He sounds as though he's jealous that he wishes he could talk about Barack Obama the way Joe Biden talks about Barack Obama. Now I think the point he's trying to make is an issue of fairness, that the media does not treat the right and the left fairly, but he does it in a clumsy way. And all he ends up doing is making himself sound jealous. What he should be doing is simply telling his audience, this is an example of why the liberals are bad. They're wrong, they're bad. Why socialism is wrong and bad. Because no conservative would ever talk this way about a black person or talk this way about anybody. No conservative would ever do this kind of thing. or no conservative would ever say this kind of thing. Therefore, conservatism is better than liberalism/socialism. Republicans are better than Democrats. Don't be a Democrat. Don't be a lefty. Be a conservative. But it's amazing how very few times that these right-wing pundits, these self-proclaimed conservatives, will fail to take the opportunity to come right out and tell people conservatism is better and be a conservative. Another part of the culture is dialectic versus debate. And it's important. Dialectic is subjective, debate is objective. And the goal of a dialectic is to arrive at a synthesis, a consensus. And the goal of debate is to arrive at the truth. The true conservative should always seek to debate and not engage in dialectic, because the other word for synthesis is compromise. Whenever you hear somebody on the left, or anybody for that matter, talking about compromising, we need to find a compromise. What they're talking about is that instead of debating and coming to the truth, finding out what the truth is, and making a decision as to what to do based on the truth, then what we should be doing instead is compromising. So we will clash our ideas together, and then we will come out with some type of a compromise. Very often you're going to see this in Washington, D.C. in terms of I forget what they called these people. There was, the gangs, various gangs, depending on what number there are. But you'll have a number of people on the left, a number of people on the right, and they will get together. Last I'd heard there was something that was called the Gang of Eight, and it involved John McCain. I forget exactly what the issue was, but there was some kind of loggerhead, there was a log jam, so to speak, for a particular piece of legislation they couldn't get through Congress, and so they formed what the news people call a gang. And this was called the Gang of Eight. There's, I think, 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, actually only 3 Republicans, because John McCain really isn't a Republican. He's a Democrat in disguise, but that's another issue. Anyhow, they formed this gang, and the idea is to hammer out what? Not to get to the truth, not to find out what's true, but to get to a compromise. Bang everything together and work out a compromise. And how many times do you hear politicians say on the floor of the Senate of the House, the people sent us here to compromise? That's a flat-out lie. The fact of the matter is, we the people send our representatives to Washington not to compromise, but to negotiate, and to do so in good faith. There's a big difference between negotiating and compromising. But anytime they're talking about compromising, they're talking about ignoring debate, engaging in a dialectic, clash of ideas. In other words, we'll have a fight, we'll have a battle, and then we'll come up with some kind of a consensus for, or a synthesis, and which is basically just another word for compromise. We will come out with some kind of a compromise instead of going out and looking for the truth, which is what's better. We need to know what to do in this country politically, what direction to go. What better way to do that than to find out what the truth is? Concepts and abstractions versus storytelling and verbal picture painting. I don't know if you've ever run across it, but there's times, and I've heard it on the radio in particular, is the host will ask a guest or a caller question, and instead of the caller answering the question in a fairly direct manner and answering the question conceptually and abstractly, the caller will start to tell a story. Well, when I got up this morning, I talked to my wife. How are you, Joe? Well, as a matter of fact, when I got up this morning, I got up on the left side of the bed instead of the right, and then my wife was upset with me because I had to crawl over her to get out of bed, blah, 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 blah. And they might go on for 15, 20, 30 seconds telling a story. Another way of putting this in terms of a slogan is, you've heard the expression that when you ask somebody the time, they tell you how to build a clock. That's basically the idea of storytelling. Verbal picture painting is using various types of slogans such as "in over my head." There was a commercial that was for a company that helps you with tax problems with the IRS. Okay, so this one person that was testifying, so to speak, on behalf of the company kept using these verbal picture painting things. I was in over my head. They were going to hang me out to dry. Those kinds of little slogans are verbal picture painting. The problem with those storytelling verbal picture painting, although they're more vivid, is that they are less accurate. It's very difficult to figure out what it is a person is trying to communicate when they're communicating with storytelling and verbal picture painting. So, the true conservative, wherever possible, whenever possible, as much as possible, stays away from storytelling and verbal picture painting. So, psychological manipulation, bullying, and intimidation is also one of the cultural techniques of the left. And defeating the left necessarily means defeating psychological manipulation, bullying, and intimidation. The tactics and techniques for psychological manipulation, bullying, and intimidation are, number one, gaslighting. So there's a lot of books on gaslighting and on narcissism, because the left has a tendency to be narcissistic and promote narcissism. So you can find gaslighting is basically trying to make you feel like you're crazy. Something happens, and gaslighting could be summed up with the slogan, deny everything, admit nothing, make countercharges. That's basically the essence of gaslighting. Sloganeering is another way the left attempts to dominate our culture. And the problem with this is that it's very easy to use counter slogans if you know what you're doing. Some of these things I'm about to quote are bumper stickers, and then I'm going to give you the slogan and then followed by the counter slogan. So question everything is the slogan. And the correct counter slogan to that is why? Question authority. Says who? Subvert the dominant paradigm. Fuck you. Coexist. Go to hell. Well-behaved women rarely make history. Suck my dick. The earth does not belong to us. We belong to the earth. Drop dead. Give back. It's mine. Okay? The malevolent universe premise is the premise that the left uses to promote everything else it's doing culturally. And the malevolent universe premise is the idea that failure is to be expected. Those that are successful have either cheated, gotten lucky, or a combination of the two. And this premise is the basis for hating all successful people, especially the rich. It has also given rise to the slogan, give back. But you may question, why is it that we promote people, we boost them up, and then all of a sudden tear them down? This is why. Okay, the malevolent universe premise. We come out and we say, basically, is that if a baseball player becomes a Hall of Famer and he makes a lot of money, he's very successful, that he must have cheated, maybe steroids, gotten lucky, he was born with his talent, or a combination of the two. So, you're always going to hear a lot of interviewers, especially national interviewers like ESPN, if they're interviewing an athlete, one of the first questions they'll ask them is, do you feel lucky? And the answer to that question for a true conservative is no. It's insulting. It is to imply that the athlete did no work, that they did not earn anything they have. It just fell in their lap. And this is, the impetus for the give back movement. You hear all these athletes saying, well, I'm giving back. When you hear with any entertainer that makes a lot of money, I'm going to give back. He's giving back. How do you plan to give back? And the answer for that is, the right mentality about it is, hey, I didn't steal anything. I didn't borrow anything. So I don't have to give back. I may decide to engage in charitable behavior. I may decide that I'm going to create my own charity. I may decide that I want to contribute to a charity or a charitable cause. That's fine. But giving back is not necessary. And then you got the isms that are all on top of the malevolent universe premise. Then there is the isms like skepticism. You don't know that. Whenever you hear somebody say you don't know that, they're engaging in skepticism. Determinism. You didn't build that. You didn't make that. Is determinism in action. That was a quote from former President Obama in a speech he was making. You didn't, when he's talking about small businesses. It's not because you were smarter than or you were harder working than. You didn't build that. You didn't make that. And what his argument is determinism. Nobody has free will, and that everybody is forced to do what they do by powers beyond their control. It denies free will. It's also the theory behind all of the preventative government programs, preventing smoking, preventing any health issues, diabetes, obesity, etc. Because the theory is that if you you can't control yourself. That you're forced to do what you do by powers beyond your control, usually by corporations, big corporations, that are brainwashing you through the use of advertising. So pragmatism is basically the idea that that the ends justify the means. Hedonism, if it feels good, do it. And let's see what else we got here. Yeah, skepticism, we'll just go to skepticism is the basis for all environmental so-called science and essentially promotes superstition. Determinism is the basis for preventive government, so preventing violence, DUIs, and subjectivism is the basis for all group rights. Subjectivism is the idea that every individual has their own reality, that we cannot know, therefore, ourselves or each other, or we can only know ourselves, but we cannot know each other because we have nothing in common. So very often you'll frequently hear people say, you don't know me. I used to hear that a lot when I was in junior high school from people. You judge, you make a judgment statement. You can't judge me. You don't know me. I don't have to know you intimately. All I have to do is know that you're a human being, know that we have certain things in common, and that's the basis that I'm going to use to make judgments about you, myself, and the world around me. So, and pragmatism is the rationalization, by the way, for all criminal activity. And the last thing I want to say was values are universal. There's no right-wing or left-wing values. The right acknowledges universal values, and the left does not. You'll hear people talk about those are conservative values or those are socialist values. There's no such thing. There's no such thing as a personal philosophy, and there's certainly no such thing as personal values. So when I come back, I'm going to be reading a little something from the Conservative Dictionary. Thank you very much, and welcome back. From the Conservative Dictionary, there's the word conservative. One who adamantly believes in preserving the principles of individual freedom and limited government codified in the Constitution of the United States. And it's wrong, and it's wrong chiefly because it's vague. It's incredibly vague. And so they say that a definition is genus plus differentia. He included the genus, failed to include the differentia. His definition could be used to describe many different words. So I think it's kind of ironic that in the Conservative Dictionary, they misdefine the word conservative. So let's see. Back in a minute. Thank you very much. So who are the true conservatives? They are the people that understand that conservatism is not just political but cultural as well. They're patriotic people who use common sense. They make judgments instead of predictions. They speak clearly and definitively and are not afraid to say no. They're open-minded, asking why rather than why not. They're consistent, credible, and influential, not ashamed of their existence, unafraid to learn or correct their mistakes. They are normal Americans. And that brings me to the conclusion of another episode of The Drill. And until next time, thanks for listening and have a great day.